Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 3 of Rationality from AI to Zombie. This episode is called Why Truth and. Some of the comments on overcoming bias have touched on the question of why we ought to see truth. Thankfully, not many have questioned what truth is. Our shaping motivation for configuring our thoughts to rationality, which determines whether a given configuration is good or bad, comes from why ever we wanted to find truth in the first place. It is written, "The first virtue is curiosity." Curiosity is one reason to seek truth, and it may not be the only one, but it has a special and admirable purity. If your motive is curiosity, you will assign priority to questions according to how the questions themselves tickle your personal aesthetic sense. A trickier challenge, with a greater probability of failure, may be worth more effort than a simpler one just because it is more fun. As I noted, people often think of rationality and emotion as adversaries. Since curiosity is an emotion, I suspect that some people will object to treating curiosity as a part of rationality. For my part, I label an emotion as not rational if it rests on mistaken beliefs, or rather on mistake-producing epistemic conduct. If the iron approaches your face and you believe it is hot and it is cool, the way opposes your fear. If the iron approaches your face and you believe it is cool and it is hot, the way opposes your calm. Conversely then, an emotion that is evoked by correct belief or epistemically rational thinking is a rational emotion, and this has the advantage of letting us regard calm as an emotional state rather than a privileged default. When people think of emotion and rationality as opposed, I suspect they are really thinking of System 1 and System 2, fast perceptual judgments versus slow deliberative judgment. Deliberative judgments aren't always true, and perceptual judgments aren't always false, so it is very important to distinguish that dichotomy from rationality. Both systems can serve the goal of truth, or defeat it, depending on how they are used. Besides sheer emotional curiosity, what other motives are there for desiring truth? Well, you might want to accomplish some specific real-world goal, like building an aeroplane, and therefore you need to know some specific truth about aerodynamics. Or, more mundanely, you want chocolate milk, and therefore you want to know whether the local grocery has chocolate milk, so you can choose whether to walk there or to somewhere else. If this is the reason you want truth, then the priority you assign to your questions will reflect the expected utility of their information. How much the possible answers influence your choices, how much your choices matter, and how much you expect to find an answer that changes your choice from its default. To seek truth merely for its instrumental value may seem impure. Should we not desire the truth for its own sake? But such investigations are extremely important, because they create an outside criterion of verification. If your airplane drops out of the sky, or if you get to the store and find no chocolate milk, it's a hint that you did something wrong. You get feedback on which modes of thinking work and which don't. Your curiosity is a wonderful thing, but it may not linger too long on verifying its answers once the attractive mystery is gone. Curiosity, as a human emotion, has been around since long before the ancient Greeks. But what set humanity firmly on the path of science was noticing that certain modes of thinking uncovered beliefs that let us manipulate the world. As far as sheer curiosity goes, spinning campfire tales of gods and heroes satisfied that desire just as well, and no one realized that anything was wrong with that. Are there motives for seeking truth besides curiosity and pragmatism? The third reason that I can think of is morality. You believe that to seek the truth is noble and important and worthwhile. Though such an ideal also attaches an intrinsic value to truth, it is a very different state of mind from simple curiosity. Being curious about what's behind the curtain doesn't feel the same as believing that you have a moral duty to look there. In the latter state of mind, you are a lot more likely to believe that someone else should look behind the curtain too, or castigate them if they deliberately close their eyes. For this reason, I would also label as morality the belief that truth-seeking is pragmatically important to society, and is therefore incumbent as a duty upon all. Your priorities, under this motivation, will be determined by your ideals about which truths are most important, not most useful or most intriguing, or about when, under what circumstances the duty to see the truth is at its strongest. I tend to be suspicious of morality as a motivation for rationality, not because I reject the moral ideal, but because it invites certain kinds of trouble. It is too easy to acquire, as learned moral duties, modes of thinking that are dreadful missteps in the dark. Consider Mrs. Spock of Star Trek, a naive archetype of rationality. Spock's emotional state is always set to calm, even when wildly inappropriate. He often gives many significant digits for probabilities that are grossly uncalibrated. For example, Captain, if you steer the Enterprise directly into that black hole, our probability of surviving is only 2.234%. Yet, 9 times out of 10, the Enterprise is not destroyed. What kind of tragic fool gives 4 decimal places for a figure that is off by 2 orders of magnitude? Yet this popular image is how many people conceive of the duty to be rational. Small wonder that they do not embrace it wholeheartedly. To make rationality into a moral duty is to give it all the dreadful degrees of freedom of an arbitrary tribal custom. People arrive at the wrong answer and then indignantly protest that their action was proprietary, rather than learning from their mistake. And yet, if we're going to improve our skills of rationality, go beyond the standards of performance set by hunter-gatherers, we'll need deliberate beliefs about how to think with proprietary. When we write new mental programs for ourselves, they start out in System 2, the deliberate system, and are only slowly, if ever, trained into the neural circuitry that underlies System 1. So, if there are certain kinds of thinking that we find we want to avoid, like, say, biases, it will end up represented within System 2 as an injunction not to think that way, a professed duty of avoidance. If we want the truth, we can most effectively obtain it by thinking in certain ways rather than others. These are the types of techniques of rationality. And some of the techniques of rationality involve overcoming a certain class of obstacles, the biases. End chapter. Yep, I knew Spock was going to show up sooner or later, and not just because I've read this before, but it's just too obvious to miss. Through some quirk of physiology or training or what have you, I've always found myself wanting to know what truth is. And that seems to be the most boring and ordinary thing ever. Surely everybody wants that. Well, incredibly, it seems to be no. There are a large number of otherwise sensible adult people in the world that I have met that don't want to know what the truth is. They literally don't want to think about bad things because, and they would never actually say this, but it seems to be that they are operating on the level of, if I don't think about it, it won't happen. Now, when you verbalize that, that sounds monstrously stupid. Who in their right mind would say or think such a thing? But hold up a second. I bet if you're honest with yourself, you will find examples within your own life where you have done that exact thing. Where you have avoided or tried to avoid thinking about an unpleasant subject in the hope that, unvoiced though it may be, if you don't think about it, it will either go away or not be real. And I found myself shocked to discover this unspoken attitude in somebody, in a number of somebodies, that you would expect never to do such a thing. People as sensible and grounded as a parent, you would imagine. Surely a parent would want to take absolutely no chances with their children, with their safety and with the life that they lead, and so obviously they would not muck around with such silly things like this. But no, you find regular, ordinary, relatively sane adults doing things like not thinking about potential diseases that their kids might get, and then, because they deliberately didn't think about it, then not taking sensible precautions to ensure that their kids don't get terrible injuries or diseases. And you might think, oh my gosh, how terrible and irresponsible and possibly even slightly insane. But the thing is, when you've got that trick, when you've got that habit, you can also avoid that problem by not thinking about it either, thus sweeping the whole lot under the rug. And I've seen it, and I'm willing to bet money that if you stop and think, you'll have seen it yourself, either in others or possibly in yourself. Nobody's perfect. We all do these. And while I'm certain it's going to show up at some stage later in the story, I am forced to think of the Litany of Gendlin, which I've mentioned in the past. It goes like this. What is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And because it's true, it is what is there to be interacted with. Anything untrue isn't there to be lived. People can stand what is true, for they are already enduring it. So, not owning up to whether there is or is not a wasp in the room will not actually change whether there is or is not a wasp in the room. And I suspect many of us have found, as maturity eventually lands on us, that the actual apprehension can in fact, in many cases, be worse than the reality about which we are apprehensive. In that the uncertainty and dread of, is there a wasp in the room, is actually worse than discovering that yes, there is in fact a wasp in the room. I'm mentioning wasps as many people don't like them, and once upon a time, long ago, I used to have a phobia of wasps. So yeah, that's the thing. Anyway, that was episode 3. Tune in later for episode 4. What's the bias again? Bye for now.